what is the definition of success? So what are you striving to achieve and why? Let's just have a bit of a laugh with it and see where it goes. Be open-minded.
Have we got the hair at Leipzig? So we got...
Today I'm sat with Nick O'Sullivan. Nick works for a company called Barnett Ravenscroft. Nick is my financial advisor and is a top bloke. And we're going to talk loosely around planning, because as well as Nick, I guess, advising me, we both work for mutual clients, and I don't think there's a coincidence in that. So yeah, let's talk planning, Nick.
Where do we start on planning?
Where do we start on planning? Is there a question you'd like to ask me, or shall I ask you a question?
Well, I'll ask you where you start. Where do you start on planning? When you sit down with a client for the first time, what's the first thing you do? When you say, right, let's start building a plan, where do you start? I'll compare notes.
Yeah. So a plan is describing something that you're trying to achieve. So a plan, I guess, is how you actually achieve that. And all I ever want to do when I'm sat down with either prospective clients or clients is try and understand what they're trying to achieve and what's going to put a smile on their face. And that's not for me to decide, it's for them to tell me. And I think once we've got a bit of clarity about that, it's then a question of trying to work out what we actually have and what we don't have and what we need to do in order to actually get there. I think the other really key thing is actually just understanding the timescale as well.
Yeah.
Because if it's something that needs doing for next week, it just might change the urgency on some of the actions, whereas if we've got 5 years, then we can concentrate on doing the good things or the most important things first.
I mean, I think I can sort of vaguely remember the first time we met, actually, in a cafe. We were talking about planning, and we both sort of agreed that to come up with a plan, you've got to start at the end. What is it we're trying to achieve? Yeah. And then you've also got to understand why you're trying to achieve it as well. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And then once you've got that end state and you've clarified, okay, this is exactly what we're trying to achieve and why we're trying to achieve it, it's then working back from there and go, okay, so that's where I want to finish up. Okay, so where are we starting from? We need to understand where we're starting from. And then, like you said, it's filling in the gaps. So if I'm starting here and I want to get to there, what does that journey look like? What are the priorities to fix? What are the key dependencies? Mm-hmm. What bits are potentially, single points of failure that I need to make sure I mitigate and reinforce? And then how am I going to allocate resources to various bits of this plan to deliver that?
Yeah.
And we both had this really similar, although we've arrived at it through different journeys, this really similar view on what a plan was and how you build it and the utility it serves, really, because I think a lot of people often go, well, I don't necessarily see the point of a plan because everything's so dynamic and it changes all the time anyway. And I absolutely agree with that. From a military background, we had a saying that no plan survives contact with the enemy. We'll spend days or sometimes weeks building this really impressive plan, and then they go on operations, and within the first hour the weather's changed or the conditions changed or the enemy's not quite the strength and disposition you thought it was. But because by that point everyone knows their role in the plan and what the end state is they're trying to achieve, you can flex it fairly easily, and people within your team can adapt fairly easily and fairly quickly to make sure that end state is still achieved. I mean, I think some of the key benefits for a plan, a plan does a number of things. One, it gives people some tangible action points and some very clear action points in terms of how it is they're going to achieve what it is they want to achieve. And that in itself then I think has a sort of secondary effect in that people then have more clarity and certainty over what's required of them and what they need to do to get there. I think very often people that haven't got a plan can become a little bit unstuck in, is this the right thing to do? Should I be prioritising this thing or this thing? And a plan can really help address that and say, well, if you remember, we chatted about this is the end state, this is where we are currently, and this is how we said we're going to get there, and this is the most important bit right now. And so that's the bit you need to focus on. And then we said this other stuff you're going to delegate to, you know, X, Y, or Z. And so that the benefit of a plan, bringing that certainty and clarity to the way forward, can give people, particularly business owners, some real confidence in terms of how they need to drive their business and their team.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that brilliantly within the business space. And then what I try to do is bring a similar effect into someone's personal finances. So they'll say a lot of people start a business because they want to achieve a certain thing in business in order so they can live their lives a certain way. So I talk to people about, you know, how is it you see your life being in, you know, 10, 15, 20 years time, or even a lot closer than that, 2, 3, 4, 5 years time. I say, okay, so if that's what you want it to look like, we know that actually if we costed all that up, these are the financial resources you need. But actually, if we do the right things financially, this is where the sort of specialist knowledge comes in, where we can get what we thought was figure A, we can reduce that to figure B because we can be a bit more tax efficient and we can take advantage of various other options. So now we've reduced what you need in your personal space, but this new figure of B is what you need your business to deliver for you. And then that's where the complementary work with yourself really comes in, because you can then talk to people like, well, we know now that you want your business ideally to achieve this figure B, and this is the best way that we can do it, and that you're great at that with your clients, and just bringing this absolute clarity to this is what we're trying to achieve and this is the best way to do it.
And from my perspective, if I'm coming across a situation with one of my clients and they have a finance requirement, then that is the point where straight away I'm thinking, okay, you know what, that is the limit of my involvement in terms of what we need to do next. We need to speak to this individual because I know that he's going to approach it in exactly the same way that I would, but he's an expert within that field. And that's what you do. Just one of the points that you mentioned before, and I think it's one of the things that crops up a lot. You know, those people that actually say, yeah, but things change so often. So, you know, I do a plan and then things change. And I think when you were talking then about I think for me it's about looking a little bit further in advance. So it might be 5 or 10 years time, because I would question things don't tend to change that quickly over the course of a few weeks, a month, 6 months, in terms of really what you want to achieve in your life in the next 5 or 10 years. Specific circumstances might change, and the actions that you've identified for the next 12 months may well change as a result of certain things, COVID, whatever it might be, or certain things that we didn't foresee. But that doesn't necessarily impact what you want to achieve in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And I do wonder whether when people say that, they're actually looking a little bit too closely. They're not thinking perhaps that little bit longer term. And things do change longer term. You know, things do, and I think it's important. You know, no plan can be cast in stone, but it's really just getting to it's digging beneath, isn't it? In terms of, you said there about the why, the motivation. What is it you're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
You know, at some point far enough advance, that is probably, you know, hopefully not going to change next Tuesday and then the following Friday.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something that you have to revisit on, I don't know, an annual basis, really, just to double check that is still relevant.
Yeah. It's funny because as you were talking there, it got me thinking about, so one of the sessions I often do with clients is we examine exactly that, so what is it they're trying to achieve, and I still always start off by asking them to write down, you know, certain things that they're aiming to achieve in key areas of their life, so, you know, personal, business, whatever it might be. And pretty much every time, without failure, not to ruin a surprise for potential future clients, but pretty much every time without failure, what people start off writing down is their objectives and how they're going to achieve it.
Yeah.
And then what we do throughout the session, we start digging out, you know, why is that important to you? Well, actually, I want to achieve that because, you know, it will help me to have closer relationships with my kids, or enable me to feel like I can feel a success within myself. And so the goal that they're actually trying to achieve is to achieve these closer family ties.
Yeah.
And the way they are going to achieve it is what they started off writing down, which
Yeah.
is, you know, to have a certain amount of money, or to be able to spend so much time at home instead of in the office. So yeah, being really clear on that end state, as you say, really helps people then start going, well, the end state doesn't actually change, as you mentioned. The aim is always to spend more time with my family, for example. But the mechanism that's going to allow them to do that might be different at any one point in time.
Spot on. Very relevant to ask this question. How did you learn all this stuff? What was the biggest, where does it come from? Because it's not something that I'm massively used to coming across.
You know, that. Now I know you're thinking the answer's dead easy, but actually I think it's quite a tricky one. So my background's military. So by training, I joined the Royal Marines. I spent just under 13 years in the Royal Marines, and gradually increasingly sort of grappled with planning. And I won't lie, initially I found it really tricky, and went through Royal Marines officer training, and they had a little book called Tactical Aid Memoir, and within that, when you were writing a plan, it had certain headings for you to follow. And at that stage, as a very junior officer still in training or recently out of training, I thought that when I followed that book to produce a plan, I had to write something down for every single bit in there, because there was a heading saying that, so I have to put something underneath that heading. And I thought planning was this really difficult process that you had to grapple with to make it fit, even if you didn't quite understand it. And I really struggled for the first probably few years of my career to get to grips with this. And the epiphany for me came much later on when I was a sort of senior captain, and certainly by the time I went to staff college, where I started to then have the confidence to go, do you know what, I know there's a heading that says that, but that does not fit this situation, and that does not fit what I'm trying to achieve. So I'm going to get rid of that one. I don't want it. And actually what I want, what I think this plan needs, is a heading like this. And I need to think these sort of issues and why they're relevant. And as soon as I had the confidence then to start adapting a plan to what I think was required and the way I worked best and the task at hand that we needed to solve, planning for me then became a lot easier. And it isn't this rigid process that you either follow well or you don't follow well. It absolutely is a dynamic thing that you have the freedom to adjust to whatever way works best for you or for your business or for the scenario you're trying to fix. And I think as soon as I realised that, I then got much better at looking at a problem on a case-by-case basis and go, right, this is the scenario for this particular client or person. So how am I going to break this problem down? Well, these are the key issues. This is the broad sequence of events I think we need to tackle it in. And so I'm going to make a plan for them that looks like this. And the more I did that, the more I got better at breaking down a problem into its component parts, looking at prioritisations, allocating various resources to various tasks, and then producing a fairly clear plan of action on the back of it. So the short answer to your question was probably military training, but actually the longer answer to your question was military training coupled with experience and increasing confidence.
Yeah, and that's a great answer.
Have a bit of a laugh with it and see where it goes. Be open-minded.